They said it was just hair, but the sound of the clippers felt louder than any scream I could have made. I remember the coldness in the room, not from the air, but from the two people who were supposed to protect me. And the moment the first lock fell, I realized this wasn't about beauty. It was about control. My name is Lena, and for most of my marriage, I convinced myself that silence was safer than truth. My husband, Daniel, had a mother who carried her own past like a knife, sharp, ready, and always pointed at me. We lived in a small house on the edge of his family's land, where every window felt watched, every whisper carried. I thought love would soften them. I thought loyalty would save me. But the night they took a piece of me, without asking, without mercy, everything changed. I remember the way Daniel first said it, soft, almost laughing, like it was nothing at all. We were sitting on the balcony of our first apartment, the one with the peeling paint and the view of a streetlight that hummed all night. The wind moved my hair across my face, and I brushed it back without thinking. Daniel watched the movement like it meant something, and in that quiet moment, with the evening settling around us, he told me that his mother didn't like women who showed off. It should have sounded strange. But love has a way of quieting the alarms that later seem so obvious. Back then, I was still learning the shape of our marriage, the soft places, the sharp edges hiding underneath. The mornings were gentle. I'd make tea in the kitchen where the tiles always felt cold no matter the weather. And Daniel would come behind me and brush my hair away from my neck. We were new, still pretending the world outside didn't reach us. His mother visited often. She had this way of looking around our home like she was checking for dust on my soul. Her eyes always lingered on me, not with warmth, just assessment, as if she was trying to solve a problem she couldn't name. And whenever I laughed or moved, or tucked my hair behind my ear, I could feel her watching. Daniel would glance at her, then at me, and something would pass between them, a message I wasn't supposed to understand. He'd say, "Lena, don't do that," with a smile so thin it barely held itself together. But I didn't know what that was. I told myself families have quirks, that some people are simply old-fashioned, that a woman touching her own hair, her own body, could never be a crime. Still, the air in the house shifted each time his mother visited. It grew heavier, quieter, as if the walls held their breath, waiting for me to slip. It started small, little reminders from Daniel disguised as affection. "Don't walk like that. People will get the wrong idea. Don't smile so wide. You look like you're trying too hard. Don't fix your hair when men are around." He'd say it gently at first, brushing my shoulder afterward, as if to soften the sting. But the softness was rehearsed, practiced. One morning, he watched me get ready for a family dinner. The mirror was fogged from my shower, and I could see only the faint outline of us, me, adjusting the curl near my cheek, and him, standing behind me with his hands in his pockets. "You don't need to do all that," he said quietly. "All what?" I asked. He pointed at my hair, at the simple clip I was fixing. Showing off. The words hung between us like smoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't push. He just said it as if it was a truth everyone agreed on. And I stood there, frozen, trying to understand how something as small as my hair could become something that made him uneasy. Later that day, his mother sat at the dinner table, her lips pressed into a thin line, her fork barely touching her food. Every time I reached up to adjust my hair, her eyes flicked toward Daniel, and he nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a ritual they'd practiced long before I ever entered their lives. The comments got sharper after that, quicker. He'd correct me before I even moved, as if he could anticipate my gestures better than I could myself. "Lena, don't," before I touched a strand. "Lena, stop," before I breathed a little too deeply. "Lena, please," before I laughed. And each correction chipped something away, pieces small enough that I didn't notice the holes until much later. There was a morning that stays with me, a quiet one, the kind where light enters slowly and the world hasn't decided what kind of day it wants to be. I was sitting at the kitchen table, hair loose around my shoulders, still damp from my shower. The kettle clicked off behind me, but I didn't move. I just sat there, letting the warmth from the mug seep into my palms. Daniel walked in. He looked tired, already irritated by something I hadn't done yet. When he saw my hair, unpinned, unhidden, simply mine, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not fear, something colder. A quiet insistence that who I was didn't fit the shape he wanted me to be. "You know," he said as he leaned against the counter, "my mom thinks you do it on purpose." I looked up slowly. "Do what?" He nodded toward me, toward the hair that framed my face, toward the softness they wanted to carve out of me. "That thing women do when they want attention." He said it like a fact, like a diagnosis. And in that moment, the air shifted. The house felt smaller. The walls leaned closer, as if listening. It wasn't about hair. It was never about hair. It was about control, about shrinking me until I fit into the small space they had carved for me. The realization settled in my chest, slow and cold. And once it settled, it didn't leave. I sat there looking at him, at the man I had married, and wondered how long he had been carrying those beliefs like stones in his pocket, heavy, hidden, ready to sink whatever they touched. That night, I sat alone on the edge of the bed, brushing my hair in slow, quiet strokes. The room was dark except for the streetlight. Outside, casting thin lines. Across the floor, lines that looked like cracks in the wood. Daniel slept beside me, breathing evenly, untouched by the storm that lived in the spaces between us. I watched my reflection in the dark window. The outline of a woman who had started to lose pieces of herself, without even realizing. And I whispered, so softly even I barely heard it, "Why does something so gentle threaten them so much? And what else are they willing to take?" The brush paused in my hand. The night held its breath, and deep inside, the first tiny crack of truth began to open. The night began the way storms do, quietly, with a stillness that felt borrowed. I remember standing in the living room, the lamp flickering like it couldn't decide whether to stay alive. My shadow trembled on the wall behind me, thin and uncertain. As Daniel watched me from across the room, his mother sat in the corner, her hands folded neatly on her lap, her eyes sharp enough to slice through the silence. And before a single word was spoken, I felt it. The shift in the air, the way the house braced itself, the way my heart knew something was about to break. The evening had started softly. Dinner plates were still warm in the sink, and the smell of roasted garlic lingered in the air. I'd worn a simple sweater, hair pulled back loosely, trying to keep the peace the way women are taught to, by taking up less space, by moving quietly, by lowering flames before they ever rise. Daniel had been distant all day, his jaw tight, his eyes moving past me instead of toward me. I kept telling myself he was tired from work, that tomorrow would be better, that love still lived somewhere beneath his silence. But when his mother arrived unannounced, the way she always did, her presence pulled something dark into the room. She walked around the living room slowly, her gaze skimming over the furniture, then settling on me. Not with curiosity, not with kindness, just judgment, the kind you could feel even after looking away. I tried to keep my breathing steady, tried to settle the trembling feeling in my chest. But the walls felt closer that night. The floorboards felt colder. And every sound, even the small ones, echoed like they were trying to warn me. It began with one sentence. A sentence spoken softly, but sharp enough to cut through the room. "Lena," Daniel said, "you need to stop." Inviting attention. I turned slowly, unsure if I'd heard him right. "My love, I'm just standing here," I whispered. He didn't look at me. He looked at my hands, at the loose strand of hair that had fallen across my cheek, at anything but my eyes. "That's exactly what I mean," he said. His mother leaned back in her chair, a small, satisfied smile touching her mouth. Like a judge who already knew the verdict, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear, not yet, just confusion, the kind that comes right before realization. "I didn't do anything," I said quietly, "because I needed to hear my own voice say it." His mother scoffed. "Oh, don't pretend you don't know. Women like you always know. Women like you." It echoed through my bones. Daniel nodded as if agreeing with something I hadn't heard. "She's right, Lena. You don't even see the way men look at you. You encourage it." The room tilted slightly. The lamp flickered again. A train passed somewhere in the distance, its rumble barely touching the walls. And I felt myself shrinking, inch by inch. Because suddenly it wasn't about hair, or a smile, or a gesture. It was about a version of me they had created, one that I didn't recognize. His mother's voice cut into the silence, cold and steady. "You're just like the others, pretending to be innocent, acting like you're above temptation. But I see you." She started telling stories. Stories of women who'd betrayed trust, women who had destroyed marriages with a glance, women who played the victim until the moment they won. Each story twisted slowly, like a knife turned by an unshaking hand. And somehow, I became the villain in every one. Daniel stood beside her now, arms crossed, shoulders stiff. "Say something," he said quietly to me. But what could I say in a trial where the verdict had been written long before I arrived? My throat tightened. Words gathered at the edge, but fear held them back. Not fear of him. Fear of losing myself by trying to defend something so simple, so human. My existence, my presence, my body. His mother leaned forward. "You think we don't notice how you carry yourself? How you look around? How your hair moves when you talk?" I exhaled shakily. "It's just my hair," I whispered. "No," Daniel said, stepping closer. "It's never just hair." Then he grabbed my wrist. Not hard, not violently, but with a trembling, desperate grip. Like he was trying to hold on to something slipping away, or trying to keep me from becoming something he feared. His voice shook. "Why do you make me feel like this? Why do you make us feel like this?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man drowning in expectations he'd inherited long before me. A man who didn't know where his mother's voice ended and his own began. And in that moment, I realized something that hurt deeper than the accusation. The man who vowed to love me was now afraid of me simply existing. When he finally let go of my wrist, the room felt different. Colder, quieter, like it was choosing sides. His mother sat back, satisfied. Daniel leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Eyes glassy with confusion, he mistook for righteousness. I stood there, the skin on my wrist warming slowly where his fingers had been. The lamp behind me buzzed, a soft, tired sound. The kind of sound a home makes when it's no longer sure who it belongs to. I looked at both of them, at the darkness gathering in the corners, at the version of me they'd built from fear and stories that weren't mine. And I felt something inside me shift, a thin crack, barely noticeable, but deep enough to let the truth in. I stepped back, my voice barely a whisper. When did love become the thing I fear most in this house? The question hung in the air, unanswered, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any accusation. The night was so still. I could hear the hum of the bathroom light before I even stepped inside. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt aware, like it had been waiting for me. Daniel didn't say a word when he guided me toward the chair. His hands were steady, too steady. His mother stood behind him, holding the clippers the way someone might hold a truth they were finally ready to use. The cord dragged across the floor, whispering against the tiles. And all I could think was, when did my home stop feeling like mine? I remember the way the bathroom smelled faintly of bleach, sharp, clean, almost hopeful. A strange scent for a moment like that. The mirror fogged around the edges from the shower Daniel had taken earlier, the warmth still clinging to the air. When I caught my reflection, it was blurry, just outlines of a face I used to recognize. I sat down slowly, my legs colder than the tile beneath my feet. Daniel's hands rested on my shoulders, not forceful, not gentle. Just there, like he'd already made peace with whatever he was about to do. His mother didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed on the clippers. Her lips pressed into a thin line that had nothing to do with anger. It was something else, something older. "Hold her still," she said, like I wasn't in the room. Daniel didn't answer, but his fingers tightened just a little, just enough to tell me he heard her, just enough to tell me he would obey. There were 100 questions pressing against my throat, but none of them made it out, because a part of me already knew this wasn't about hair. This was about control, about being shaped into something I never agreed to become. The clippers buzzed to life, filling the small room with a low, angry vibration. I felt it in my teeth, in the hollow of my chest. Daniel's mother stepped closer, and the sound grew louder, sharper, like a warning. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry. My heartbeat rose to my ears, matching the rhythm of the buzzing. Still, no one spoke. She placed her hand on the top of my head, her touch cold, not cruel, just final. "This is for your own good," she murmured. Daniel didn't echo her. He didn't have to. The first pass of the clippers touched my scalp, and a shiver ran straight down my spine. I braced myself for pain, sharp, cutting, but it wasn't painful at all. It just burned, a slow, steady warmth, like something sacred being taken apart. Hair slid down the sides of my face in soft clumps, dark pieces of me falling to the white tiles like snow that didn't belong in this season. I stared at the floor, afraid that if I looked in the mirror, I would see something breaking. Daniel breathed behind me, a shaky exhale he tried to hide. That's when it struck me. He wasn't unsure of what he was doing. He was unsure of what it made him. Half of my hair was gone before I found the courage to lift my eyes. The mirror was clearer now, the fog slowly slipping away, revealing the truth inch by inch. I didn't look like me anymore. I looked like someone they could rewrite. His mother's face remained calm, almost peaceful, as she steered the clippers around the back of my head. The sound deepened as the blades clogged with the weight of what used to be mine. "Daniel," I whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't look at me. He just kept his hands on my shoulders, as if he feared that if he let go for even a second, I'd stand up and remember I had a choice. Another lock fell, heavier than it should have been. "Why are you doing this?" My voice barely carried over the buzzing. Daniel's hands tightened. His mother spoke before he could. "She needs to learn. She thinks she can go outside looking like that and expect men not to stare." The words struck harder than the clippers ever could. So that was it. Not jealousy, not anger, fear. Not mine, theirs. Fear of losing control. Fear of a woman with confidence, with presence, with a voice. I felt something shift in the room. Not the air, me. A quiet understanding settled in my chest. They weren't cutting my hair. They were cutting my freedom. By the time the clippers went silent, the room felt colder. Daniel lifted his hands from my shoulders slowly, as if letting go of something heavier than my body. His mother unplugged the clippers and shook the hair from the blades. She didn't meet my eyes. Maybe she didn't want to see what she'd created. I stared down at the floor, at the pieces of myself scattered like fallen leaves. When I finally looked in the mirror, I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I just breathed, a long, steady breath I didn't know I'd been holding. And in that quiet exhale, one thought rose through the stillness. If they could do this once, what else had they already planned? I remember the quiet first. Not the act itself, not the buzzing of the clippers, not even the way my own heartbeat felt like it was trying to climb out of my throat. Just the silence afterward. It sat in the hallway like a third shadow, stretching long, refusing to move. Daniel stood near the doorway, his back to me. Shoulders curled in like he was trying to disappear into his own body. His mother hummed, some old tune with no meaning, while she swept up what used to be mine. I sat there on the cold bathroom floor, watching strands of my hair cling to the tiles like they weren't ready to let go. And neither was I. The bathroom light flickered each time the house breathed. This soft hum through the walls. It always did that. The flicker, like it struggled to stay alive. I used to joke about it. I used to laugh. But that night, the flicker felt like warning. The mirror in front of me was fogged around the edges, the way glass gets when the room holds too many unspoken things. I wiped it with my palm, slow, almost afraid of what I'd find. My reflection blinked back at me, bare and small. My scalp looked strange, raw, like new skin still learning how to be touched. I lifted a hand, tracing the uneven shape where her clippers had dragged too close. My fingers trembled, not from sadness, from something older, something bone deep. Daniel hadn't spoken since his mother pushed the door shut behind her. He stood in the hall with his head bowed, as if the floor had suddenly become more interesting than me. He didn't look at what he'd done, or maybe he couldn't. The bruises on my arms, small, round fingerprints, were already turning a dusky purple. They looked like someone else's marks, someone else's story, but they were mine. And in that small, bright bathroom, it felt like the house was holding its breath with me. I stayed seated on the floor even after I heard the soft scrape of the broom fade down the hall. I didn't trust my legs to hold me. The tiles were cold through the thin fabric of my clothes, but the cold steadied me, gave me something real to hold on to. The door was half open, the kind of open that says you can leave, if you still know how. Daniel shifted once, just enough that I knew he was still there. Still listening for something from me. "Lena," he whispered. Just my name. Not an apology, not an explanation. He didn't step inside. He didn't kneel down like the man I married used to do when he thought I was upset. He just stood there with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, shoulders stiff, like he was afraid any sudden move might break what little piece was left. The quiet stretched between us, thin as thread. I studied him through the mirror, how he kept his gaze fixed on the hallway wall. On nothing. His jaw clenched. A tiny muscle near his ear twitched. He'd look at me, then he wouldn't. Like he wanted to face what he'd done but didn't know how to stand in that truth. And I watched that. Every hesitation, every swallowed word. That's when I realized he wasn't avoiding me. He was avoiding himself. I pushed myself up slowly, using the counter for balance. My legs felt foreign, like they belonged to someone braver, someone who didn't tremble when the world shifted under her feet. The mirror caught me again, this strange, newly shorn woman. There was fear in her eyes, yes, but also a flicker of something else. Anger? No, deeper. Recognition. When I stepped toward the door, Daniel finally looked up. His eyes widened just a little, like he didn't expect me to move. Like he thought I'd stay where they left me. His voice cracked. Please, don't look at me like that. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking through him, at the truth I hadn't dared to name before. This, what happened, wasn't a moment of rage. I saw that now. Anger leaves fast. It burns hot and disappears. This was different, colder, controlled. He hadn't lost himself. He had chosen this. Chosen to hold me down. Chosen to let her take the clippers to my head. Chosen to stay silent while she hummed through her triumph. He looked at me like a man who feared what he'd unleashed. But not enough to undo it. And in that moment, I understood the part that terrified me most. He enjoyed the control, not the act, not the aftermath, the control. I stepped past him, the floorboards creaking under my weight. He didn't follow. He didn't reach for me. He just whispered my name again, softer this time, as if the house might scold him for speaking too loudly. I didn't answer. The hallway felt longer than it ever had, the air colder. My bare scalp tingled with every shift of the breeze, every whisper of movement in that old house. It made the world feel sharper somehow, more honest. I paused halfway down the hall, fingers grazing the wall for balance. What comes next? I didn't know. But for the first time that night, the silence didn't scare me. It guided me. It told me the truth. And the truth was, I couldn't go back to who I was before. Not after this. The house was still breathing when I opened my eyes. Not loudly, just the way old houses do, with small groans in the walls and the faint hum of something settling in the dark. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but a pale line of blue was waiting behind the curtains, soft enough to feel like a promise. I lay there for a long moment listening for footsteps, listening for anger, listening for the kind of silence that comes only after people do something they're not supposed to do. And in that fading night, with the smell of clipped hair still haunting the air, I realized I wasn't waking up. I was getting ready to leave. I moved slowly, the way someone walks through a memory they're not ready to look at. My feet touched the cold floor, and it creaked under me, almost like it remembered yesterday better than I did. The bruises on my shoulders pulsed with every small shift, soft circles of purple blooming like fingerprints that refused to fade. The room looked different now. Maybe it was me who changed. The dresser, once full of my things, felt like it belonged to a stranger. The mirror on the far wall didn't pull me toward it the way it used to. After last night, I didn't trust reflections anymore. I kept my hands close to my body, as if gathering whatever pieces of myself I still owned. A sweater, a small bag, a folded paper I had written months ago, a list of things I loved. Back when I remembered how to love them, I opened drawers quietly, not because I feared waking anyone, but because fear wasn't the same anymore. Last night had taken the shape of something else, something colder. When someone holds you down long enough, the silence afterward becomes the loudest sound in the world. I took only what felt like mine. Everything else could stay behind, like a shed skin. When I stepped into the hallway, the house was still wearing its nighttime breath. Shadows clung to the edges of the walls, long and gentle like they didn't want to frighten me. The air was colder here. Maybe the heater had turned off. Or maybe the house just didn't care to keep me warm anymore. I moved past the door where he slept. I didn't stop. I didn't look. There was no sound from inside the room, not even the shift of blankets. Control makes people confident, too confident. He didn't think I would leave. They never do. The stairs creaked under me, each step a small confession. I held the railing lightly, avoiding the places where the wood splintered. The kitchen light was off, but the faint glow from the street outside painted a thin line across the tiles, guiding me forward. My bag felt weightless on my shoulder. That's how little I truly owned. On the counter, there were still strands of my hair, the ones she swept too quickly, the ones that escaped her little victory ritual. They curled softly against the surface, like they didn't know they'd been taken. I brushed my fingers over them, not to mourn, just to remember the difference between what was done to me and what I was about to choose. When I opened the front door, the cold air came in first. It wrapped around my bare head gently, like the world was placing a hand there, not to pity, but to welcome. The sky was a pale gray, the kind that only appears before sunrise, soft enough to feel like mercy. I stepped outside and let the door close behind me. There was no slam, just a soft click, final and tender. The street was empty. The world was quiet. No one saw me leave, and somehow that made it feel real. I stood on the small patch of concrete in front of the house and let myself breathe. Really breathe. The air was sharp, almost sweet, filling places inside me that had been hollow for too long. That's when the truth settled, quietly, the way all painful truths do. The moment those clippers touched my skin, the marriage had ended. Not because of the hair, but because of the hands, because of the silence, because of the way he didn't look at me afterwards, as though acknowledging what he'd done would turn him into someone he didn't want to see. I wasn't leaving because I was brave. I was leaving because staying had become a kind of dying, and I was suddenly, quietly done with dying. I began walking slowly at first, then faster as the morning air opened itself wider. My shadow stretched long behind me, thin and unfamiliar without the shape of my hair. The wind brushed against my scalp, and I let it. It was the first touch in a long time that didn't take anything from me. The sky lightened bit by bit, as if someone was lifting a dimmer on the world. Birds started their morning songs, cautious at first, then louder. I held my bag close, not tightly, just close enough. And as I reached the end of the street, I whispered into the quiet morning, "What does freedom look like when you've never felt it before?" The road ahead didn't answer, but it opened.